Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today, we're going to be talking about what happens if it all goes down when you are in the city. We're going to be talking about the urban bugout and how to get home. And this is actually another listener request episode, which is kind of cool. I guess just simply because I'm kind of a homesteader and Chris does work from home and has spent a lot of time out in the bush and in the desert, that a lot of our episodes are kind of focused around, I guess, the scenario stuff, around kind of like the lone wolfing it out in the forest. And I think that we probably haven't focused on the urban bug out scenario. So yeah, that's going to be kind of cool. I'm going to talk about some of what to do if you're traveling internationally, or if you're even traveling domestically to a city you're not familiar with, because that's literally what I do all the time. And then Chris is going to jump in with some of the true, like, hey, I'm going to my office, and how do I get home if shit hits the fan while I'm there for the day, because he's actually done that in his real life. So yeah, this is going to be pretty fun.
Yeah, this should be a pretty fun theory episode. We're going to kind of take it in stages, though. So kind of how to get from where you are to where you want to be, and kind of take that from different points on the planet or in your city. And I mean, if you're already at home, that makes everything easy. You're already home. But are you at the office? Maybe you're on vacation somewhere when everything goes to hell. I mean, how do you plan for something like that? And where's your line in the sand on when to leave? Because a lot of people don't realize you have to make that decision. There is a lot of info in this episode, so strap in and buckle up. But this is one of those episodes where we're going to start compounding on previous ones. So listen to the Risk Matrix episode and listen to the AFAC episode, and you can kind of start to see how all of this works together to build your plan to help you survive and make you your own stakeholder.
Yeah, that's right. That's awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about traveling internationally, because I do that. And that's a big word, right? You could be anywhere. There's 196 countries, depending on how you split them up. So everything's a little different. But I want to talk about some very high level stuff just to think about, that's going to make your life a whole lot easier if you're traveling internationally.
There's one country and 195 territories.
That's exactly. There's one country, and the rest of them are all just like a upstairs apartment at a really cool party. But yeah. You're right. There is only one country. Everything else is a mistake.
I don't know about mistake, but just hasn't been annexed yet.
Yeah. So let's say you're traveling somewhere that you need a passport to go. The most important advice I could ever give anybody, and a lot of people don't do this, a lot of people maybe don't know, is pre-registering with the U.S. Embassy or consulate. It's so easy. You can do it online, and you just give them your travel plans. You just say, hey, here's where I'm staying, here's when I'm flying in or out, and here's where I'm going to be. And then if something happens, the U.S. Embassy will actually contact you. And this has happened to me before. Nothing super crazy, but I was in Colombia, and I had there were some riots in Bogota, and I don't think it's anything big. They just riot all the time. But the U.S. Embassy reached out to me. I got a text message, and they were like, hey, avoid this part of the city, which was just really cool. So if something really bad happened, then you could actually get help coming home. So that's one of the biggest things, is register with the embassy. No matter, even if you're just going to Mexico on holiday, it's so easy to do. Register with the U.S. Embassy, and then if something happens, they know where you are, and they know there are U.S. citizens there, and they will do what they can to help you. I can't actually remember what disaster it was. I want to say there was an earthquake in Latin America in the last couple of years. And in Peru, I remember seeing a story that the U.S. Embassy had arranged a charter flight to get U.S. citizens home. Now, it wasn't free, by the way. Like, it was expensive to do that, but versus, putting a couple grand on my credit card, paying it off versus being stuck in in a foreign country after a major earthquake or something. Yeah, man, I'll just go ahead and make the payments. So
No,
they will help.
it was the flight that was pretty expensive, but registering with the embassy, that was free, right?
Yeah, sorry if I'm being ambiguous there. Yeah, exactly. Registering with the embassy is absolutely free. No, the flight to get home, if they try to get you out, yeah, they're making you pay for that. But it's just a smart thing to do. Just register with the embassy. Now, if you happen to be in a foreign country and shit does hit the fan, you have a very important choice to make, and you really only have one. Do you go to the airport or do you go to the American embassy or consulate? This is the choice to make. There's basically two main factors at play here. Are the airplanes flying, and how far are you from each location? That's really what you have to decide. Is airports, especially in a lot of foreign countries, they do have pretty good security. I mean, a lot of the airports I go to, even in maybe third-ish world nations, they generally kind of have the airport on lockdown because like U.S. air carriers won't fly in there if they don't. So they generally do have pretty good security. There's generally military. Obviously, if there's a full-on revolution, they won't keep you safe. But in many cases, they do have police or military detachments, and they're often a little more fortified than like our domestic airports. But there is something about, I'm telling you, there's something about rolling into a U.S. embassy in like a hot area with that pretty blue passport and having the Marines say, "What's up?" It's just, there is some feeling that I cannot describe here, that if you roll into the U.S. embassy and there's Marines at the guard station and they're just like, "Welcome home," that feels pretty freaking good.
That I can't say I've ever done that. I've done the passport thing coming back into the United States, but it's never been that feeling of like, oh, I'm completely safe now. I'm still in the fucking airport.
No, I have been in a couple countries that were a little sketch. And I was just going to the embassy because I had some meetings there, and you walk into the embassy, man, you roll out the US passport and there's a bunch of Marines looking slick and they're just like, "Come on in, welcome home," because you're on US soil. So that does feel good. But yeah, so that's the important choice to make is, hey, am I going to go to the US embassy or am I going to go to the airport? And there's a couple of factors at play. Now, the last thing I would say about traveling internationally is having some kind of backup comms. I carry a Garmin little inReach. It's a satellite communicator. They are not very expensive. And Garmin just did a bunch of like lower priced plans. I had one, I think it was like 12 or 13 bucks a month, which isn't cheap. And I was paying for it. And it gave you like 10 messages for free every month that I was never using because I don't use it that often. But they just changed their plans up to where they have a $7.99 a month plan, and then you don't get any free messages. So just for $8 a month, you have the peace of mind of having this little satellite communicator that can go anywhere and can get reception anywhere you see the clear view of the sky. So that's cool. And these are the inReach. Basically, Garmin bought a couple of companies. They bought Spot, which was what now is the inReach, and they bought a company called Delorme, I think, who had really, really good cartography, like great maps. So when you get one of these little satellite communicators and pay the $8 a month, you get offline maps. And we talked about this a little bit in our land navigation episode, but you can actually get maps, really, really good maps of the entire world. Anywhere that there's a cartography office, you can get these maps, whether you want to download the USGS type stuff with topography or whether you want to download the like street maps. But they download those and they're offline, meaning that once you download them onto your phone, then it doesn't matter if you don't have cell service. Those maps are there and you get that free when you do the Garmin subscription thing. Now, I'm not sponsored by Garmin. We don't have anything to do with Garmin, but I carry a lot of their gear. But this little Spot inReachy thing communicator, awesome. And now they have the new ones. They actually do like photos over satellite. Like it costs you $1 or something, but you could send photos over satellite. So
interesting.
Very cool. It's a very cool tech. I mean, satellite tech is it's coming a long way in a very short amount of time. So,
and if it is one of those things where, obviously your inReach does require batteries, so does your any type of GPS communication, it requires some sort of power source. So
that's right.
In the case of you need a paper map, you can always go to our link through stakeholderprepping.com and go to My Topo, and you can get waterproof paper maps of any area that you want. You just have
That's
to do
right.
it ahead of time so that they can get delivered.
Yeah, there's something to be said for a map, especially if you are going to go somewhere where maybe, I mean, even like right now, traveling to Eastern Europe where they have some GPS spoofy jammy issues, like, yeah, having a map would be nice. Now, the other thing that would be really cool if you've got something like this is, I think we talked about in episode 5, is having one of those little USB power banks that is solar chargeable. And then, yeah, you can charge these things like, you know, if you've got a watch that's got navigation built in or one of these little in-reach communicators. So that's kind of my advice for traveling internationally and having something go down. Now, domestically, you obviously have a lot more options. Ideally, you've got a really good travel loadout. You've got some supplies, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, you may even be one of those people that travels with a handgun, depending on where you travel. So domestically, you know, have a kit. Take your bag. Take your get home bag. Have your augmented travel get home bag, whatever. But you've got a lot more supplies on you, ideally. But first thing to do in SHTF, if you're on vacation, or as the Brits say, on holiday, or even on work travel. That was my best Brit. That was all right, right? Yeah.
I'll give you an A for effort.
On holiday. Anyway, so, or on work travel, which I usually am, in somewhere in the contiguous U.S. The first thing to do, if something goes down, what I would do, I would rent a car. And I've done this before. Like if something goes down, you're worried about something, natural disaster, rent a car, because now you have a mobile home base. All-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, SUV, preferred. But dude, minivan, close second. You can get a lot done in a minivan. You can live in a minivan, toss out some seats, and you can spread out in that thing. You can put a blow-up air mattress in a minivan. So I'm just saying that if you are in a situation where you don't have somewhere to go, get yourself a vehicle first thing. You can rent a car. And I remember in World War Z, there was a really cool scene where Brad Pitt was talking to these Hispanic people that were living in the building they were trying to get out of, and they were staying put. And Brad Pitt had said something in my Spanish pretty bad, but he basically said, like, el movimiento es vida, which means movement is life, saying that the idea of constant movement and action are necessary for survival in the face of a zombie apocalypse. And I just kind of like that, you know? So
it makes sense too, because if if it's a slow moving SHTF event, maybe it's not a sudden impact like a meteor or an earthquake or something like that. Maybe it's a volcano that cloud is starting to come. It's still slow moving, but if you can take the initiative to get ahead of it, you're going to be way better off than anybody who can't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, and just getting the F out of the city. I remember seeing stories about Superstorm Sandy. God, you can't say that. But anyway, I remember seeing these reports where, like, it was bad, but like a lot of people had a lot of issues because they were getting in fights at the gas station, you know, like shootouts just trying to get gas. Like, just don't be around people. Like, people are the problem. We're the wild card. Everything else you can deal with. So just, like, get in your minivan and get the fuck out of the city. That's the one thing I can say about that. Like, just, it's people, right? We're the issue.
I 120% agree with you. And we have had experience with a minivan. We had to rent one because our Jeep ended up in the shop. We got rear-ended.
Tell me you got a Pacifica S model. I'm telling you, the S model Pacificas are rad.
This was several years ago. We ended up getting a Town and Country.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But for a minivan, we were impressed. That thing can haul ass, and a lot of it. It was like 9 passenger, and you could lay everything down.
That's exactly awesome. Right. People like us that aren't like kid people don't really understand like that minivans. Yeah, they have a ton of power because they're made to haul like 9 people in them, and they have a lot of space in there, and a lot of them have that stow and go seating. So if something happened and you've got a minivan, that you have somewhere to live in there, you have somewhere to sleep in there, and they do have a lot of power.
And they've got enough get up and go to get you out of a risky situation if need be. Most minivans nowadays are going to be all-wheel drive, if not full-time four-wheel drive.
Right.
But I mean, it's one of those things you can't put a price on the comfort that it's going to provide you, even if it's just a dry roof over your
Right.
head and you run
Yeah.
out of gas.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's kind of funny. It's like a minivan commercial, but not like the kids in the soccer game. This is like apocalypse and you're like living in it all of a sudden.
I can imagine the next series of minivans having like an apocalyptic commercial behind it.
Don't you think?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
dude, if you had a blow up air mattress and a tarp, you're good to go. But I will tell a personal story about this. So back over the summer when we had that CrowdStrike data breach patch, whatever, that grounded all those flights, I was traveling. I was actually at a Navy base around the Norfolk area. And anybody who's familiar with Norfolk, it's a smaller kind of feeder airport. And I was sitting there, I was watching flights get delayed and canceled. And then soon enough, pretty much every single flight in the entire airport was canceled, including mine. And immediately I went online to rent a car. And I couldn't. It was just all jacked up. So I have a kind of like an emergency travel agency that I use. It costs a little more money, but I call a number and I get one of like 3 people and they're working all the time. So I called the number and I said, hey, listen, I'm stuck at Norfolk. I don't know. I'm not from there, so I apologize, people that are, if I'm saying it wrong, but I was stuck in Norfolk and I said, I need a car. And she goes, I think I can get you one. It looks like they're having kind of the same issues, but I did manage to secure you one. You just have to go down to the desk and see if you can get this thing. So I go down to the desk, and the woman working there, I said, hey, I've got a reservation. She goes, yeah, our system is messed up too. She goes, is it a local or is it a one-way? Now I was trying to go to Dulles. I was going to go to DC because I could get direct flights home, and it's a larger airport. So she goes, are you going local, or are you going one way? I said one way. She goes, I'm only allowed to rent them locally right now. And I looked at her and she looked at me and I said, well, then it's local. And we just stared at each other for a little bit because we both knew I was going to steal that car. And so eventually she just handed me the keys, because here's the thing about rental cars is you're not really stealing them. If you rent the car, you can return that. Like, let's say Hertz, for example. If you rent a Hertz car anywhere in the US, you can return that Hertz car to any Hertz place, no matter where you said you were going to return it. And when you return it, they just kind of charge you as a one-way. Like, they redo the charge. I'm like, hey, it was $60 if it was a staying local rental type thing, and now it's $120 because it's one way or whatever it is. But yeah, you can return those things anywhere, and pretty much all those rental car agencies, they say something on their little contract like, if you're going to be only a day late, then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to call them. They will just charge you another day of the previous negotiated rate. So like I said, I travel all the time. I'm mostly kind of Hertz and Avis, so I can't talk about everybody. But with Hertz specifically, yeah, I just stole that car from her. She goes, I can't rent them one way. I was like, okay, well then it's not one way. And we just stared at each other for a little bit. And eventually she just gave me the keys. And I drove to DC. I turned it in. They printed me a receipt and we were all good.
We did something kind of similar when we got stuck in a Denver airport during a snowstorm. So we were flying, I can't remember where we were flying from, but we flew into Denver and then our final destination was Colorado Springs. Well, snowstorm rolled in and our flight was going to be delayed for 2 hours or something like that. And we were both like, let's just rent a car and go home because it's an hour and a half drive.
100%.
And we actually made it down to the airport through the snow on I-25. We made it down to the airport in Colorado Springs before our plane landed that we were supposed to be on. We returned the car and got our regular car, and then we just went home. So we were actually pulling up into our driveway before anyone on our plane got off that plane.
Right. So anyway, keep that in mind. Renting a car, very good way to go if anything goes down, because like Brad Pitt says, movement is life. So that's kind of what I've got for the for the work holiday type, I'm not from there travel. But I think, Chris, you're going to really dig into some of this. You've done this before, like gone to a place for work in the city, those kinds of things. And we have a lot of listeners that have said that exact same thing. Like, hey, what kind of advice, tips and tricks can you give me for the urban bug out scenario, the urban get home scenario? So what else do you have?
So a lot of this comes with kind of the restrictions of what your company is going to place on you. Some places will allow you to have a knife in the building or have a firearm in the building, and you don't have to tell anybody about it. They don't care.
Rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Some places, they would rather see you hang by a jury of 12 for carrying a gun into their metal detectors. So
Sure.
Keep in mind, this is all flexible. What I recommend and what I have done and what my wife has done is we always had a get home bag in our vehicle. And what that get home bag entailed was, what do I need? Worst case scenario, everything is shut down. No place has gas. No place has food or power or water, whatever it happens to be. What do I need to get home?
Like, you're planning on how many hours is it for me to walk home, and I need that much gear in order to get there, right?
Exactly. And that's where our get home bags had an extra set of clothes, and we would change out the clothes depending on the weather. So warm pants or cool, durable pants. Both of our get home bags, my wife would wear heels to the office. So rather than walk 7 miles in heels, it's a lot easier to do it in hiking boots.
Sure.
And she would have her set of clothes. So warm weather, cool weather, kind of that overarching 3-season jacket to keep you warm and dry. Also, we had food, water, not a heavy bag, just something that you can get home to. And that's what it's designed for. It's your get home bag is at most a 72-hour road travel kit. It's just designed you to get to your home or to your Bugout bag or your next place, your next spot.
Right. That's a survive kit. That's not a comfortable kit, right? The idea is less weight, get home, because that's where everything is, or your Bugout location or whatever, right?
Get home faster. And
Yep.
It's the same principle that a lot of people that do concealed carry will tell you about carrying their pistol and a long gun or a rifle in the backseat of their car. The pistol is there so that they can get to the long gun.
Sure.
Well, this is just a little bit different because your Bugout bag or home is your long gun. This is just the basic tools to get you from point A to point B. And maybe you work 50 miles from home. Maybe you work, maybe you're a regional manager, so you have to bounce around between 50, 75, 125 miles away on a daily basis. You have to kind of map that out.
I was going to say, and a lot of times there is like a survive in place aspect to that, right? Where, your office building, that may be somewhere secure. Like you said, if it's got metal detectors and big heavy doors and you can't even get a gun in there, that may be somewhere to weather the storm, so to speak. So I think that's a decision that has to be made too, right? Like, am I going to grab my bag and walk home in the lightning storm in the middle of the night, or maybe I'm going to survive in place overnight and then worry about trying to get home, right?
You're right on point, because you do have to have it preset in your mind what your definition of when to leave is. Is this a snowstorm that, okay, I'm going to spend one night in the office, I'm going to be on the hard floor, with an airport blanket or something like that for one night, but the plows will have cleared all that snow away and I can get home in the morning? Or is this I need to leave right now because where I am is becoming more and more and more dangerous? And if you don't have that kind of pre-planned and have that line in the sand or that cutoff line, you may be screwing yourself over. And that also applies for bugging in versus bugging out.
Right. That's it. That's actually a really good point is, yeah, you have to decide, because I know many office buildings that they may be a survivable place, right? Big, hefty building. They may be able to survive if there's a natural disaster or something like that. They could be secure. There's at least like coffee and Coffee Mate, and you can rummage the fridge for Brenda's yogurt and stuff. So yeah, you can generally survive in there for some amount of time.
Don't steal Brenda's yogurt. It's not what you think it is.
She's got a name on it and everything. So, but anyway, no, there usually is some amount of food. There's definitely going to be first aid supplies there, right? I think probably most of the OSHA rules say there's going to be pretty good first aid supplies. There may be AEDs. So the office, it may be a good place to weather the storm, so to speak, for some amount of time, right? Like if you're going to say, hey, let's just hunker down overnight and see what happens. I guess it's a decision to make, but I think that a lot of people do just say, oh man, something bad happened. I got to get home. I've got to go sit my ass in traffic and run out of gas, where the wise decision might be, you know what, I will sit and play solitaire for 4 or 5 hours, let stuff die down, and then I can maybe try to make it home.
And that all depends on what is causing that issue. Is it a riot? Is it a snowstorm? Is it a tornado? Is it, the dogs got sick and you need to go take them to the vet?
Right.
What defines that line in the sand? And it could be proximity to you. If it is riots, if they're happening downtown, but you work, in the western part of the city and there's no real risk of it, that's maybe not a huge concern unless you live downtown. And then you may have to go protect your property. Is it happening right outside your door? Now it may not be safe to leave because you waited too long. So whether it's trying to leave your office or the doctor's office or even grocery shopping, have a set idea of, if things go bad, what is my cutoff line for I'm turning around and leaving? Because the office that I worked in, it had an industrial kitchen, full commercial kitchen. It had all of the big freezers and stuff like that because there were thousands of employees that worked there. They did have a full-on clinic in that office, just in case people got hurt falling down the stairs or pinched a finger or whatever. And they also did chiropractic appointments for those that were sitting in desks. They had tornado shelters, they had fire emergency plans, they had everything. And I could have very easily stayed overnight or even over weekend and been completely comfortable and just gone home on Monday.
I'm picturing you trying to set up like the level 1 trauma center in your, makeshift clinic, and you've got this poor chiropractor going, dude, come on, I don't do this. I like crack backs and stuff.
Step aside, I've got my paraknife.
I've got my paraknife. Oh.
Hey, Bobby, you got a box cutter? Why? I need to practice a tracheotomy. No, you don't.
Like, it's just a windstorm, Chris. Calm down here.
What are you practicing on? I don't know. I found a rat in the basement. But there is a big difference between shelter in place and then leaving. So, like we said, your get home bag, that is your get to your home or get to your bug out bag or things like that. A bug out bag generally has more supplies, and it's going to be a kit with some of your tactical supplies, more food, more water filtration, a larger first aid kit, things like that, that's going to get you either from home to your bug out location or from home to your cache or your rally point. And from that RP, you can restock, refit, and go on to your final site. And that's a challenge for me because we don't have a bug out site. We don't have a final location that we're going to. So, and AC, I know you do.
Yeah, I do, and I do have a sort of a bug out location, which is further from me. But really, my whole plan is to not go anywhere. I'm probably gonna lock the doors and die on my property is kind of my plan. But yeah, having a bug out location, I guess that's another one of those decisions to make. That's like, do I go to the embassy or the airport? Right? Is if whatever is happening is from your office heading towards your home, then yeah, you're probably going to have some kind of secondary or tertiary bug out location just in case. And it's good to think about that stuff now. It's good to coordinate that with your family now, because think about that. If, comms are down and the wife or the kids are in different parts of town, they need to know, like, hey, what are we going to do if something goes down? You don't want the kids trying to go home when the wildfire's going that way, right?
You don't. And that's a good point. Having that pre-coordination. One of the things that my wife and I do, we actually have words that we use as code words. And I won't give you ours, but an example would be like if I say to you, AC, hey, rosemary blue. That could mean that shit has hit the fan it's all going down. We need to evac immediately. Like, there is no turning around, no second guessing. We both know we're grabbing everything and going. But if I tell you, hey, I'm having my coffee with honey, you know, I'm going to be late. This is an emergency. Prepare for the follow-on, but we're not leaving yet.
Got it. So that's not like the, hey, I've been kidnapped and I've got to, use some secret code word, but that's more of like the, I'm in an office and all my coworkers hear that I'm on the phone and I just don't want to be like super apocalyptic right now, right?
Right. And in the series, The Unit, in one of the last episodes, one of the characters, he calls his wife and they're trying to defuse a nuclear bomb. And before he gets to it, his leader says, hey, call home, give him your code word. And he just picks up the phone. His wife picks up on the other end and he says, alas, Babylon. And she knows immediately, like, something is very, very wrong. I can't give you any more detail than that, but get everything ready to go in case we have to move. Or in that case, it may be, don't expect me home, period.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that scene in Terminator 2 where the Terminator and John Connor call the foster parents to see if, the bad Terminator had shown up, and you can hear the dog bark in the background, and he's like, what's your dog's name? And he's like, it's Max. And he's like, hey, Janelle, what's wrong with Wolfie? And it's like, and then he just hangs up the phone. He's like, your foster parents are dead.
Yep. And that's what it comes down to, is it's that quick communication and deciphering what each thing means. So
sure,
for my wife and I, if I say one particular word, she knows this is an emergency. Grab a gun, a weapon, whatever you have standing by, and be ready to fight. Versus if I give another pair of words, we know this is the end of the line. We're bugging out. We have our RPs everywhere. We don't have a final location, but we can get to where we need to go so that we can survive.
Yep. Meet me at the rally point. Yeah, that's actually a really, really good call.
And having them pre-designated, knowing where they are, having alternate routes to get to them. If it's an alternate route from home to office, that's something you should be planning for anyways, because a traffic jam or a flat tire or a car accident can happen in front of you at any point. Have that alternate route kind of worked out in your head and practice your alternate routes. I know I got into a really bad habit of every day I would drive the same route to work. I knew exactly how long it took me to get there, but car accident threw me way off and I ended up being like 45 minutes late to work one day.
Yeah,
because I didn't think about my alternates.
And this goes back to not just the risk matrix stuff, but when we were talking about having the MyTopo map and being able to do dead reckoning, right? This is exactly what we're talking about, is if you've got that custom map of your office or your home or wherever you're working from, and you're just staring at that thing all day, then it's going to make your dead reckoning a whole lot better when the map on your cell phone quits working and the Waze app stops working. And you're like, man, I've got to go overland now. I'm not going to hike on the freeway. I've got to figure out how to get home. Having that map already is definitely going to make your dead reckoning skills just that much better, right?
And you can recognize what's an area to avoid. If you are staring at that map, day in, day out, when you're not looking at your computer screen, hey, if I cross over that barrier on the highway, I'm in a pond with alligators. That's a problem.
Right. Good call. And also, when we talk about rally points, I don't want to be alarmist, because I think people are like, what do you mean? Like, I don't have like a cache in like an electrical box somewhere with a bunch of like guns and ammo. But think about this. If your family has a storage unit somewhere, this could be as simple as having a go bag in the storage unit and making sure everybody has a key to the storage unit. It's just that easy. This isn't crazy stuff. We're talking about, it's so easy to plan now for stuff like that. Maybe you have a friend who owns a business and you can just put a locker there, something like that. Think about those sort of things. These are very easy, kind of mundane things to do. And when we're saying rally point, this is really us being a bit militaristic, but really it's as simple as saying, hey, let's just make sure that the wife and the kids all have a key to our storage unit, and make sure we've got a couple of MREs and some bottled water and some, and some shoes and some electric scooters there or something, right? I mean, it's that easy.
That's a really good point. I do say RP or rally point just because
Right.
that's what I'm used to.
Right.
It's not necessarily a military term. And this is something that you can get your bug out group or your community that you want to survive with. If you maybe they're a full state over and you're going to meet in the middle at this storage facility, whoever gets there first is responsible for unpacking
Yep.
XYZ.
Yep. It can just be that easy.
So I know we've kind of gone on about RPs and having a bug out site and code words and the difference between bug out bags and get home bags. But what do you do if you are just kind of either starting out and everything happens all at once, or you were unprepared, you didn't use your risk matrix, ignored the warning signs, none of your normal tool kit is at your disposal to get home? What do we do then? Because that's kind of the worst case scenario, right, AC?
Yeah, I mean, that really is. It's right. This is the being unprepared is not that awesome. And like I said, having the comms is one thing. I think, if the cell phones are down, maybe your landline in your office still works. That's an alternative comm. And we always talked about this as having your primary and having your, secondary and having your backup and that kind of stuff. This is that PACE model we talked about before. So comms is the biggest thing. Everybody has to know what you're going to do. And so whether that's something you've predetermined with your group or your family about, hey, if it's this bad, we're going to do this or we're going to go here. But ideally, you've got comms. And like I said, there's a couple of different ways. The little satellite communicator is one way to have that backup comm system. Depending on how far away you are from each other, having a small ham radio. And these are easy, man. We should actually talk about this because I'm not a ham guy, but I do have a ham radio. And I apologize for the ham radio listeners out there who think I'm breaking the law, but you can still know how to use them and not use them until you really, really have to. But there's probably repeaters around, and it doesn't take a lot to sort out where those ham repeaters are and being able to actually communicate with everybody on a ham radio. If you look at these 5 or 6 or 7 watt Baofeng radios, these things are cheap. I mean, these are like sub $30 radios. And all you have to do is you could just have this thing under your desk and sit on a charger and you've got comms. Everybody knows, hey, we're going to be on this channel. You can tell people, hey, here's how to use the repeaters that are around. And oftentimes those repeaters have a backup power because that's what they're meant for. They're meant for emergency comms. And even if you don't do that, a lot of these ham radios, like the one I have, has the GMRS and FRS frequencies, which although you do need a license to operate on a lot of those, it's just like a card you fill out and send in. It's not like doing a test like the big ham stuff. So that's one thing that you could do right now, and it's very inexpensive, is having a radio, knowing what the range is, knowing what frequencies people are going to be on. And then we talked a little bit about having like a NOAA weather radio, right? Like my little Baofeng, and I'm pretty sure it's the cheapest one out there. That little radio also has all of the NOAA channels. You just need to know which channels those are. So having those channels being like, hey, we're going to operate on, 550, whatever. We're going to operate on this channel. And I know that my local NOAA channels are this one. That kind of stuff can help. Another thing, we talked about this a little bit in our land navigation, is those aviation frequencies. You can get weather information from your local airport. So most airports have they call it an AWOS or an ASOS, automatic surface observation system or automatic weather observation system. They're usually in like the 118-ish. No, they're higher. They're like 135-ish, I think, frequency, VHF. And a lot of these cheap ham Baofeng radios can get on that frequency. You can't talk on it, but just getting local weather and any local emergency advisory stuff will likely be on some of those automated weather stations.
And we've got a couple of Baofengs. The nice thing that I found is if you take the time to learn how to do it and plug it into your computer, you can actually secure your own radio channel and other people can use it and you're not stepping over each other. So if you're on, 71.42 or whatever frequency, you can actually code it so that only your radios can hear it. but you can hear any uncoded traffic as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that's basically just to keep traffic off of your network. So yeah, keep in mind when you do that, your communications are not secure. Everybody else can hear you. You just don't get all that other radio traffic, right? Because it does something like it just puts like two little beeps in front of it, and then your radio is only listening to traffic for that little beep or something like that. Yeah, what do they call that? A discrete frequency or something? Discrete coding?
The way that we've got ours set up is when we transmit to each other, we come through clear. If somebody else is on our frequency without coding, it comes through clear. But if they're listening to us, it comes through garble.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of what are these? They're Motorola radios, and they're basically just like the 21 channel GMRS FRS Motorola's, and I just only have the ability to basically do this like discrete coding thing where you can just basically program two radios to hear each other and just not hear all the background traffic. Because you have to imagine that if something did go down, the radio waves probably are going to fill up pretty quick. You'd have to imagine that the ham radio traffic is going to get exponentially worse because those people are ready for this. The ham guys, they're the ones that are always ready for this kind of thing.
Oh, they're sitting in their chairs with their vacuum tubes, screwing them in tight, waiting
for this
to hit
to
that
go down.
transmit button.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, so what else do you got? You want to talk a little bit about like what goes into the bug-out bag or the get-home bag or any of that kind of stuff?
I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but a little bit of food, some water, alternate clothing and shoes, particularly if you are a professional, if you're walking around in high heels or Oxfords or something like that, you don't want to walk 5 miles in those. You'll tear your feet to absolute shreds. So having a good set of hiking boots that's already broken in, something to that effect. You probably want to have a first aid kit in there because cuts, dings, scratches, they're going to happen. You don't necessarily have to have a full trauma kit that you're carrying around in your get-home bag. Like we said, this is small, lightweight, packable. We went to, I think it was Bass Pro, and we each grabbed the little cheap $20 backpacks, and that's each of our get-home bags. So it doesn't have to be huge. It's not a rucksack. But it's got enough room in it that when we pull out those clothes, get dressed, we've got room that we could pack up stuff on the way home. If you find something that is of value to you in that situation, we have the room that we can pick it up, put it in our bag. Maybe that's extra water, maybe that's food, something like that on our way home. You probably want to have a flashlight. In fact, I would say go ahead and throw a flashlight in there. We went over it a couple episodes ago, or was it last episode with the EDC kit a couple episodes ago. I carry an ArcLight Pro, and the Olight mini clip is also really good. They're super small, but they're ultra bright. And then just whatever you feel you need at the bare minimum to get home. And depending on your level of, I won't say paranoia, but your level of readiness, what is your bare minimum? Is it just your shoes and socks, or is it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more? Because keep in mind, you have to carry all of this too.
That's right. And I'll tell you my food and water go-tos. So, just the off-the-shelf bottled water, right? Just the little 99-cent bottled water type thing that you get at the 7-Eleven. Most of those life straws will screw into that. So I have a couple of those little like 16-ounce bottled waters in there and a life straw. And so the idea there is that if you go through your water, which obviously 32 ounces or so, not a ton of water, but then you can pick up rainwater somewhere, anything that's not super contaminated, and then just screw the life straw onto it and go. Now, the downside to that is you're not filtering through the life straw. So it's not like you're going to boil water or something, but just as far as having water on the go, being able to dunk those empty water bottles into some rainwater or a creek or a stream and go, that's awesome. The other thing is, I found this about the life straw is, they don't necessarily clean up the taste 100%. And if you're going to be rucking it, if you're going to be sweating, making sure that you have like the Pedialytes, the elements, some kind of additive, because you're going to be sweating out a lot of those salts. that's huge. And they weigh nothing, right? Just having a couple of packs of Element or Pedialyte, that's huge. So that is my pro tip for the water stuff. The other thing for food wise, this is just my rule of thumb, is I always have like the granola bars, or I like those Solus rations. You can find those. I've talked about those before, where they're just super high calorie dense. I want to say they're made mostly with like coconut oil because they're very dense, but a little brick of these things, little bars, and the reason they're called Solus, survival of life at sea rations, is because they don't induce thirst. So this little tiny brick, there might be, maybe there's 8 or 12 of those that make up somewhere around 2,800 calories. I want to say, I'm just riffing right now. But those little guys, having a bar that you can just munch on while you're going. And then my rule of thumb is, if I am going to have to stay overnight, if I know that I cannot walk from my office to my home in that, 12 or 16 hours, and I'm going to have to bed down for the night, hot meal. And that's where I go with an MRE. So having the MRE for the overnight. And Chris, I'm sure you know this firsthand from being out in the bush. The little bit of cheesy mac is just a little bit of happiness when it's hot and you are cold, right?
That is very, very true. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to eat MREs cold.
Sure.
And it's a completely different experience when you actually get the chance to heat them up.
Did you not have a rock or something?
I did not have the time to find a rock or something.
Oh, yeah.
I used to deconstruct my MREs and just shove them into my pockets, so I'd have the main meal on my right hip and all of the snacks and stuff on my left hip, and just pull them out and eat them as I could, because in a combat situation, you never know when something is going to pop off. So it was eat it as you can.
Yeah, sure.
Sleep as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of variables that go into that. Odds are the vast majority of our listeners are never going to have to experience something like a full-on combat situation. And I hope nobody ever does.
Ideally, right.
But you still want to be prepared for, I may not be able to get home to make dinner. I'm going to get hungry, I'm going to get tired, and I'm going to get cold. How do I fix that? Is that an MRE with a rock or something to heat it up, and maybe a Mylar blanket or a tent? How are you getting home?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So yeah, I think my biggest thing with the get home bag is, you think about how far, what's the maximum distance that this get home bag is going to be away from my home, right? And that's kind of it. If you can figure out, we talked about this with your pace and your ranger beads. It's pretty easy to figure out how far you could hike in those 12 hours of daylight. And so I think you can probably say, hey, if I know that I can go 25, 30 miles or something like that and make it home without having to stay overnight, then your bug-out bag or your get-home bag is going to look significantly different. And if I was in that situation where it was the maximum distance that I'm going to have to travel is 20 or 30 miles, I probably would forego the tent and the hot meal for weight restrictions. I would want to be able to go faster. So I would probably say I'm going to do the granola bar and the beef jerky, or maybe some of these Solus bars. But if I'm talking about it's 50 or 60 miles, and that's like, there's just no way I can do that in a day through unpleasantness and traffic and a bunch of other people, and I may actually have to bed down, then that's where I'm thinking, you know what, I would rather have a little bit of a tube tarp, maybe a bivy sack, and I'd probably want an MRE just so I could construct a hot meal if I've got a little bit of water left and a rock or something.
And you're 100% right there, because this is all going to be completely dependent on your specific scenario. Your spouse or significant other is not going to have the same type of scenario unless you work at the exact same place. And they have a different route. They have different restrictions. They have different weight capacity restrictions. So your get-home bag, the way I always understood it, is your get-home bag should never be more than 10% of your total body weight.
No, that's a really good rule of thumb. Yeah, that's awesome. So you're saying just put on a bunch of LBs so you can carry more stuff? Is that a tactic?
If you need more weight because you need more stuff because you're a further distance from home, you need either your own rally point so that you can get from your get home or your office to your your resupplier, your cache, or you just need a bug out bag, something larger that you can carry for a longer distance without that risk of running completely dry on supplies.
Yeah, that's a good call. And so this kind of rolls back in, and maybe you can just do a super quick, 30-second refresher, but we should probably address that risk matrix, right? This is all about risk matrix. Go back and listen to the risk matrix episode, because it is one of the more boring episodes we have done, but this is that scenario where we can't give you right now every single scenario for every person listening about how far your home is from how far your office, and how many family members, and what your drive is like and your commute is like. That's where you need to take personal responsibility using your risk matrix and decide, okay, what are the things that are most likely to happen, and how do I address those? How do I get home from the office to my home? And depending on how far that is, or how many bridges I might have to cross, or, oh my gosh, what if the bridges could be out? I live in somewhere susceptible to flooding, and now I've got to think about other ways to get across that river, that waterway that is between me and my home, right? Like the outlaw Jack Davis talked about. You just gotta cock the wagon and float across at that point, right?
Yes. And thank you to Jack Davis once again for that episode. But yeah, we can't lay out every possible scenario.
Right.
We'll be here for the next 5 years recording, and I don't think I've got enough battery in my computer to do that.
I don't have enough bladder.
That's for damn sure. I know I don't have that. But this is one of those things you really should consider creating your own risk matrix. And you do have the option, if you don't want to create your own risk matrix, if you just want to pay somebody else to do it, you can. There is options for you if you have that kind of budget. You can look at evacuation insurance or extraction insurance.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Or your hostage and negotiation insurance, depending on where you're traveling and what you're doing.
Yeah, I'll tell you from personal experience, K&R insurance is like Fight Club. Like, you just don't talk about
it. Those are options. You can have somebody else do all of the planning for you with minimal or maximum detail, whatever they require. You can contact these companies. There are several of them out there. I know we have looked into evacuation insurance for going to Mexico during hurricane season.
It's not cheap, right?
It was, for the week that we were there, I want to say it was $1,600 per person because of the time. And that's more than just one ticket down there. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
It was not cheap, but there are those options. If you want to look into having somebody else do it for you, I think there's a company in New York. AC, you were telling me about this a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I have worked sort of around these guys. When they were outfitting some of their vessels, I was vaguely involved with some of this. And there's a company called Plan B Marine that's kind of interesting. This was kind of a post 9/11 world, but you remember when we were talking about some of the RBS vessels that the Coast Guard uses, these response boat smalls, which was just the workhorse of the Coast Guard, these 25-foot safe boats. Well, when they retired those, this Plan B Marine company bought a bunch of these, and these are now staged in just discrete locations on the water all around Manhattan Island. And if you are some super rich executive and you need a way to get off the island, yeah, these guys at Plan B Marine is kind of cool. They actually have this. I mean, if you look at their website, it's kind of cool, because I wish I could read this all, but it's like, in the high stakes world of business, you can't afford to leave anything to chance, and it's like that kind of stuff. And
they've got the script for a movie trailer.
The script is, dude, 100% is, I'm looking at it right now, it's like, picture this. Power grid fails, communication goes dark, and mass transit halts to a grind, or no, grinds to a halt. I'd be a terrible movie announcer guy. But yeah, that's off their website, dude. But this is the craziest thing. Yeah, this Plan B Marine, that's what they do. Is so now if you are an executive and obviously worried about getting off the island if you have to, there are companies like that will provide executive protection and get you off the island. And I'm sure they exist other places. I'm just a little familiar with these guys at Plan B Marine on Manhattan Island, but I'm sure there's some other places that do that as well, that if you're stuck somewhere, there are ways to get out. I mean, there are helicopters will come and pick you up if you have enough money, right? So most of our listeners, including you and I, are not really in that boat.
Yeah, I am definitely not in that boat. And all I can think of is the scene in the movie 2012 where John Cusack is talking to the Russian guy and he says, "How much was the ticket?" And he goes, $1 billion.
$1 billion each. Yeah.
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 That's all I can think. It's like, how do you have that amount of money? But it's an option. If you want to leave all of the planning to somebody else, you're either paying out the nose for it or trusting them implicitly with your security.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it is funny because, these guys, like, there's no prices on the Plan B website. I'm sorry. Like, if you have to ask, you cannot afford it. But I just thought it was a cool thing because they're working with these boats that I've worked in on and around, for a ton of years. So it's just kind of a cool repurpose of these. And they actually even, the part of their pitch is like, military grade vessels get you off Manhattan Island and like all that kind of cool stuff.
And we all know what military grade means.
Yeah, exactly. It means it's got a sticker somewhere.
Right? It has an NSN number is what military grade means.
It has a national stock number. That's exactly right. So yeah, man, that's kind of it. I know this is really high level, but I think that we will go into greater detail on a lot of this stuff, but yeah,
absolutely.
This is just sort of high level stuff, and a lot of people had asked us to kind of address this. The one thing I would say is go back and listen to the risk matrix. That's the biggest thing, and then listen to the next episode. Which, Chris, do you want to tease that a little bit?
A little bit. We are going to go into our own get home bags and go over some of the things that we've got in there that we find have that kind of intrinsic value. Now, none of this we're not doing an under a certain amount or,
right.
This is not like the stocking stuffers. I can't even say that word, for under $10. This is not the 12 items under $1. This is legitimate equipment that we have and trust our lives to. And we're going to go through some of the more advanced stuff that we have in our get home bags and our bug out bags and really kind of lay out where our heads are at when we go through these episodes.
Yeah, I think, kind of the advanced bag where it's probably things you don't think about. We're not just going to dump out our bags and say, I've got a battery charger and a stick of gum. This is going to be like, here are some very specific items for specific scenarios that likely you didn't think of. And I think like in our AFAC episode, everybody I've talked to that's listened to that episode said there was at least one thing in there that was, one, a good idea, and two, they didn't know about. So I think we're going to kind of present it like that, where we'll give you kind of our half a dozen kind of weird preppy items that are in our bags. And the cool thing about that is, and we'll address this next week, is that I am more of a get home bag kind of guy. I don't have a bug out bag or a bug in bag or a survive in place kit. I don't need those things, but I do need a get home bag. And Chris kind of comes at it from a different angle where he is a lot more versed with the bug out bag. So I think that's going to be pretty fun.
I would say overall, the takeaways from this episode should be have a plan, follow your risk matrix that you need to actually put the effort into making and planning for, avoid people, and don't second guess yourself on your line in the sand when it comes to evacuate. If you need to get out, you need to get out.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, that does it for me, Chris. You want to wrap this one up?
I just want to say thank you to all of the listeners. We continue to grow. We continue to get a little bit better every time. But as always, remember, you are your own stakeholder.